Vegas. It's now completely legal. We now can do everything. It's like drinking before you're 21. Now you're 21 and you can drink. It's all about that. Tony, South Carolina at Georgia. Not a lot to talk about with this game, but certainly the Georgia Bulldogs are rolling in on the storm, and they're an underrated number 3.
Yeah, and I think what we talked about with Notre Dame, I'm going to be interesting to see how some of these teams react today in the next couple of weeks when it comes to being inside the top 10. You're obviously looking for wins, but you're looking for blowout wins. So I expect Georgia to roll. They're 21.5-point favorites. Same with some other teams that are find themselves in and out around the top 10. I think Wisconsin's going to try to put a beat down on Michigan State today, try to move their ranking. Clemson will pull away from Florida State. I think right now we're looking at some of those teams that are just thinking, let's blow these guys out and put as much numbers on the board as we can to make these wins look impressive as possible.
Rick, let's talk a little bit about the Memphis game. Obviously, number 23 going against Temple. Not a lot to talk about there, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, not a whole lot to talk about. We're talking about these the elite programs, the ones that have a shot to get into the playoff. And Tony was right. What I was going to say, just follow up there. We're getting that time of year. Week 8 is fast approaching, and that's when the playoff rankings come out. And we're at that time of year where teams want to win like in a glamorous way, would put up the gaudy numbers and just look like they're putting beat downs on everybody. So I agree with Tony. All these teams are going to be going for the throat, not just win a football game, but dominate a football game with these rankings coming out here pretty soon.
You know, we talked a little bit about this earlier with Matthew and USC, going back to USC and Notre Dame, but I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on this. I mean, this is going to be a big game, but I mean, even with the win, Rick, even with the win with Notre Dame tonight against USC, the playoff, the Final Four playoff talks, I should say, is still a long shot for Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, it's a long shot. They're definitely not out of the discussion, but they're going to need a lot of help at the same time. So, I mean, they're definitely not out of it. That close loss at Georgia did hurt them, but it didn't eliminate them. And that's just the mindset now. I don't know what the percentage is this week. It changes every week. It was like an 8% chance. Now it goes up to like a 13% chance. But they're going to need some help. They're going to need some teams ahead of them to get some losses. And Georgia has to finish undefeated.
And, Tony, wouldn't you agree that if Notre Dame loses tonight, their talk about being in the Final Four of college football is just done?
I mean, I think a loss tonight for Notre Dame puts you in like the new era Pinstripe Bowl. But I'm always what Rick said, you know, there's a lot that's going to have to fall in place for Notre Dame. But all you can do is simply play your schedule and get big wins. And if things were to fall into place, if Georgia were to get upset, that would hurt. I think you need Georgia to win as many games as possible. Maybe Alabama falls to Texas A&M and then falls to Georgia in the SEC championship game. Maybe Clemson somewhere along the lines, which they've proven this year. Remember that game a few weeks ago against North Carolina that they can be beat, that they're not as immortal as we think, although their schedule kind of lines up perfectly for Clemson. They'll get one test, and that's probably the Wake Forest game, but that's at home. So I think Clemson wins out. But you look elsewhere, if things were to fall into place, like Rick said, it's going to take a lot, but it's certainly not out of the question. And the more you win and the deeper we get in the season with wins under your belt, the better those percentage and those numbers get.
We're talking with Tony Donahue of the Tony D podcast, and Rick Riggen, our official college football contributor, joins us as well. Let's jump into some Homer Big Ten talk. Tony, we'll start with you. IU, Rutgers, and Purdue and Maryland, both Big Ten action, and the Homer card for the IU fans like myself and Purdue fans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm waiting for Purdue to, one, stay healthy, which is they proved is a tough thing to do, but two, to get a win. You know, there's a lot of scrambling for answers on offense. I think a lot of the Purdue faithful are very upset at what they've seen. I think they have a good chance to cover that 3.5 today. I want to see Purdue break out, get their second one of the year. I think going to a bowl game is out the window now. You've had every opportunity in the world. If you would have squeaked out that game against Nevada, Minnesota, maybe you're looking at a bowl. But, you know, for Purdue, I think you're looking for that offense to get going and maybe just pick up a victory. On the flip side for IU, I've liked what I've seen out of IU so far, 3-2. I don't trust this 27.5 point spread just because it's IU. I don't know how bad Rutgers is, but IU's thinking bold. They could beat Rutgers today. They can knock off Maryland next week. Nebraska isn't world beaters. You get Northwestern at home, but then you get Penn State and Michigan. But I think at the end of the year, the last game of the year, IU is going to be looking at 5 wins, possibly beat Purdue to get to a bowl game in that bucket. So I'd certainly like IU a little bit more than I like Purdue, but I don't trust any of them to put enough money on them.
Rick, what are your thoughts? IU, Rutgers, and Purdue and Maryland.
Yeah, I like the way IU looks this year. They actually, under their coach, since he took over, they have really looked to me like a physical team. It's just like it comes down to the athletes and who they have to go against in the Big Ten is what kills them right now. And as far as Purdue go, Tony, I actually have a question for Tony. Do you think it's time to start looking at Jeff Brom at Purdue? Maybe he's not the right guy. I mean, you can only ride that wave of beating Ohio State last year for so long. I think that wave has hit the shore. So I think it's time to start looking at Brom. I'm sorry.
You know, I think you kind of look at it with Purdue, and there's been some injuries and there's been some quarterback situations, but you're right. There shouldn't be any quarterback controversy. They needed to go in with, if they're going to stick with Elijah Sindelar, that was the guy. I know things happen throughout the season, but there's always that question mark of who's going to start, who's going to be there, who's going to be ready. And he's a quarterback coach. I mean, we saw what he did at Western Kentucky. We know what his career was, you know, in the XFL and playing in college football. So I think he probably bought himself some time with that big win against Ohio State last year and getting to a bowl game, although they got destroyed by Auburn. But yeah, I think there's going to be probably some question marks heading into the offseason of what direction exactly is this Purdue football team going.
Rick, let's roll into a big game. I think this is going to be one of the most entertaining games today, and that's Oklahoma against number 11 Texas. This is going to be a big game in the college football top 25, and certainly got to be a must-watch, and this is going to come down to a field goal.
It just might. It seems like here recently anymore, this is a really close game. Texas beat them last year, gave Oklahoma their only loss, and they got to play each other again for the Big 12 championship, and then Oklahoma won and got to the Final Four that way. I think this isn't going to be like that this year. I think Oklahoma gets it done by a couple of scores at least. I think Jalen Hurts is the real deal under Lincoln Riley. What Lincoln Riley has done for him is incredible. He's the clear-cut Heisman front runner right now, and this is just going to make even bigger case for him today because I think they're going to dominate Texas.
You know, Tony, talking about Lincoln Riley, everybody's talking about Lincoln Riley. What are your thoughts about him and his next move?
Yeah, I mean, you look at where he's at now. I think he's in a pretty comfortable situation. It's one of the premier programs, you know, in the country. So unless something from the next level comes along, I think you're pretty content on where you are.
Well, let me give you a hint of what my thoughts are. He's still going to be wearing red. I think the Skins got to look at him. I mean, I think the Redskins got to look at him, Tony and Rick, about being their next head coach. This could be Lincoln Riley's last year in the college ranks because I know every time a college, NFL opening comes open, we talk about him, we talk about others, but I mean, if you're the Redskins, you got to at least make the call, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian Kelly also is a guy that needs to be in the conversation. I mean, some people aren't big fans of him at Notre Dame, but I think he's been successful everywhere he's gone. He's built up programs. You know, you remember the days at Cincinnati. You remember the days before that. I think Lincoln Riley's somebody that should be looked at, and so should Brian Kelly, because I think Brian Kelly's going to start getting some looks at the next level. Rick,
that's your world. What do you think?
Yeah, my only thing with Brian Kelly, you kind of hear the NFL with him anymore, but I just don't know how his coaching style translates to the NFL. But maybe it does. Maybe Tony's right. He's been successful everywhere he goes. How come it can't work there? But if you're a fan of internet rumors like I am, I love to stir the pot, get some internet rumors going. Ryan Day is
Stir the
also
pot. Stir the pot.
yeah, stir the pot. Ryan Day, Ohio State. This is his first year, but I think the Redskins might give him a call too.
You know, we talk about that one and done, Tony. That's a good conversation to have. I mean, I think Ohio State's a much better team, and I'm not an Ohio State fan. Let's make that very clear. But I think they're a much better team without Urban Meyer.
I mean, you know, sometimes you just need that breath of fresh air in a locker room and a different voice to lead the way. You know, back to Brian Kelly, you think about all the players that have played for him that translated so well into the NFL, because Brian Kelly prepares his football team very similar to what NFL teams prepare at. You look at, you know, all the guys that are in the pro ranks right now that play football at Notre Dame. They all seem to mostly be successful. Obviously, they're smart kids going to Notre Dame. But as far as Urban Meyer at Ohio State, yeah, I could see where you would maybe need a new voice in the locker room. Maybe he would grow old. You know, we remember the end of his tenure at Florida wasn't all that great. And, you know, you kind of just think about some of the shady stuff that might have gone on with Urban Meyer. Maybe it's a breath of fresh air for those Ohio State players.
Tony, are we still on fire? Harbaugh from Michigan, and they got Illinois today. I mean, they should win that relatively easy. But are we still thinking that Jim Harbaugh is highly overrated?
You know, I don't know what to make out of Jim Harbaugh. I thought, you know, years ago he'd be a great fit for the Indianapolis Colts coach position. Obviously that failed. Look, they're still ranked 16th in the country. They had a grind-it-out win against number 14 Iowa last week. Yeah, they got spanked up in Wisconsin, which is Camp Randall's a tough place to play. But we'll see. He's certainly got to get his money's worth over the next two of the next 3 weeks when he goes to Penn State and he gets Notre Dame coming up there. And then they get Ohio State. And I think to keep your job, if you're Jim Harbaugh, you have to beat Ohio State, which you have not been able to do. So I think the jury's still out on Harbaugh and Michigan. But so far the track record is stacked against them.
Rick, let's play North Pole, South Pole. We got Alabama and Texas A&M today. We got to talk about Alabama because, well, it's Saturday, it's college football, and it's Alabama. There's no other reason to talk about Alabama other than they're Alabama. Number one against the number 24 team.
Well, I don't know if it's just because the conference they play in or who actually makes their schedule. This is one of those games, though, I like to see Alabama play in. But they play like they're one or two tough teams a year. I guess this might be one of them, Texas A&M, until they make the play against the SEC champion, you know, playing the SEC championship game. There's nothing to talk about Alabama because they don't play anybody the entire year except for like two tough games, and then they just kind of stroll into the playoffs. So they're going to get it done.
Why does that happen?
Yeah, I wonder how that happens. And Nick Saban says he has absolutely nothing to do with it, but I don't believe that either. They're going to roll today against A&M. A&M is not as good as what everybody thought. I thought Kellen Mond for A&M was going to be like a Heisman contender, and it just hasn't panned out this year. So Jimbo Fisher year two. A&M's just not quite there yet. I do think Jimbo is going to have them. He's got them up and coming. I don't know at Jimbo's tenure, though, at A&M, if they're ever going to compete with Bama or Georgia, but they might. I do think they're on the uptrend, but it's just not this year. They're just not quite there yet.
All right, final game, Tony Donahue, Florida State rolls into Clemson. Going to be a good afternoon, 3:30 game, but I really think Clemson better not fall asleep against Florida State because this is a game that Florida State Seminoles can sneak up on Clemson and get a huge win today.
Yeah, Clemson's a very tough place to play, and Florida State's been so up and down this year. You know, at 3-2. I don't know what Florida State is. I don't know what they're going to be. Obviously, you prep week in and week out, and it's hard to prep for Clemson and what Trevor Lawrence can throw at you. So we'll see. I don't expect this game to be close in the second half. You just got to worry about what's going on with Florida State. You know, you start the year, you lose to Boise State. You had to pull out overtime to beat UL Monroe. You fall to Virginia. But you've got it rolling the last 2 weeks against okay opponents, Louisville and North Carolina State. But Florida State can make some noise. They got ranked opponents the next 2 weeks. But I just don't expect this to be close. That 27-point spread kind of tells you all you need to know.
All right, guys, let's wrap up the segment here. I got to talk about